Good morning, everybody. We are back with our Exploring the Haggadah class, and today we are going to pick up where we left off yesterday, which was last week, which was in the Magid section of the Haggadah. So, if you remember last time, we looked at the first pieces of the Seder, which was saying Kiddush, the hand washing, the dipping of the vegetable, the breaking of the middle matzah, and today we are going to jump back in with the Magid section. So the Magid section is kind of the heart of the Seder. Everything we've done in prep, that is to say that came before the Seder, was really kind of the introduction to the night. And then the Magid is actually what the whole, what the Haggadah is named after. We spoke about this a little last time, but Haggadah comes from the root lahagid, which is to tell. And tonight, the Passover Seder is all about telling the story of the Exodus. And the Magid section is that act of telling. So let's start with this fact about the Seder, which is the most important number of the night, of Passover night, is the number 4. There are 4 cups of wine at the Seder. There are 4 questions. There are 4 sons. And actually, in the Magid section too, there are 4 different tellings of the Exodus. And so as we go through, we're going to look and we're going to see what are these 4 different tellings of the Exodus, and how are they structured. So we're going to look at each of these sections under kind of the following rubric. We're going to look to see how each one of these sections of the Magid starts with a declaration. Then it has some questions. Then it has some answers, and then there's praise. And that's helpful because the Magid section can be very overwhelming. There's a lot happening here in this section. But if you break it down, you'll see it's actually very well structured. So we began last time with halach ma'anya, which is this, when we hold up the middle matzah and we say that this is the bread of affliction. So that, of course, is our first declaration. Declaration number 1 is, this is the bread of affliction. And today I'll be using this Haggadah. It's a Barbanel's commentary on the Haggadah, and it has, of course, the traditional, words of the Haggadah in there too. So if you're following along, I invite you to use any Haggadah you have in your house, and you can open up to the Magid section where it starts. So we started with, this is the bread of affliction. We had that, and we read that last time. Then we had the 4 questions, which we spoke about also last time. So we're going to jump into the next part, which is Abadim Hayinu. This is the answer to the 4 questions. We began with this saying, why is tonight different from all other nights? Why tonight do we only eat matzah? Why tonight do we eat maror? Why do we dip twice tonight? Why do we recline tonight as opposed to, sitting up straight? And we get our answer, which is this paragraph, Abadim Hayinu. It says, we were slaves unto Pharaoh in Egypt, and Adonai our God took us out of there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. If the Holy One, blessed be He, had not taken our forefathers out of Egypt, we and our children and our children's children would still be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. There's the answer. And so we have, so far we have our declaration, our question, and the 4 questions, our answer. And then this is going to continue into the praise section. That's how each of these 4 different sections of Magid is organized. And so here's the praise. It says, even if all of us were wise, all of us understanding, all of us aged, all of us learned in Torah, we'd still be commanded to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And whoever enlarges upon the tale of the Exodus merits praise. So now we're going to share a story where four learned rabbis are going to be sharing, talking about the Exodus as much as possible for all night. And so this is praiseworthy to them, but it's also like exhibiting a level of honor and praise to God in that they're not just telling the story, but they're trying to expand it as much as possible. So then we have this story. It says, an incident took place in which Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon were reclining in Bnei Brak and recounting the tale of the Exodus from Egypt all that night until their students came and told them, our rabbis, the time has come for the recitation of the morning Shema. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, behold, I'm like a 70-year-old man, yet I've never been privileged to show that the Exodus from Egypt must be said at night until Ben Zoma explained it. Don't worry, we're going to go back through and talk about all this. It says, so that you will remember the day of your departure from Egypt all the days of your life. That's a verse from Devarim. You shall remember the days of Egypt all the days of your life, he says. And so Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah continues. He says, the days of your life indicates the days, like the daytime. All the days of your life indicates the nighttime. So that's how he knows now that you're supposed to talk about the Exodus in day and night. And the other sages said, the days of your life indicates this world, and all the days of your life indicates the next world. So even if you think that just because you're living and breathing, you're doing a Seder, no, actually, we'll be still talking about the Exodus, even in the world to come, whatever that means. Okay, so this section, what we just did is we kind of set the tone for the Seder. So we had the first part of Magid is actually short. We had the declaration, this is the bread of affliction, the 4 questions, those are our questions. Then we had our answer, which was we were slaves in Egypt. And then we had a story about the rabbis exhibiting lots of praise and honor to God by telling the story of the Exodus for as long as they can. And not just telling it, expounding on it. So what this does is it sets the tone for the rest of Magid. Remember, we had the statement that anybody who enlarges on the tale is praiseworthy. And so now in each of the following sections of Magid, we're going to do different things to kind of enlarge the story of the Exodus. We're going to be talking about it. We'll see as we get there, but we're going to be kind of numerically enlarging it. We're going to be looking at the different Pesukim and, expounding on those. But you'll see, that is going to be the other goal of the Magid section. It's not just to tell it, but to see to what extent we could really embellish and enlarge. Like, not in a way that we, make up things that happen in the story to make it, a more compelling story. But we're going to see to what extent we can actually enlarge the story. Okay. So that's section 1 of Magid. Remember, the number of the night is 4. 4 cups of wine, 4 questions, 4 sons. There's other 4s too. And in the Magid section, we have 4 different tellings of the story. That was number 1. Now we're going to start number 2. And I'm going to tell you the breakdown of number 2 so we know what to expect. Remember, we're looking for a declaration, a question, an answer, and then some praise. So the declaration is going to be the paragraph that starts Baruch HaMakom, blessed is God. The question is going to be the 4 sons. And in the 4 sons, we have questions like, what does the wise son ask? What does the simple son ask? Etc. Those are our questions. We're going to get an answer by way of we were idol worshipers. We'll talk about that when we get there, about why that's significant. And then finally, we have our praise, which is going to be a paragraph, blessed is the one who keeps his promise. Okay. And that's going to be section 2 of Magid, the second kind of telling of the Exodus story. So let's start together with Baruch HaMakom. So it says, blessed is HaMakom. Blessed is God. So to stop there for a second, during the Seder on Passover, we call God by this very special name, Hamakom, which means the place. The other time that we call God Hamakom, the place, is during Shiva, when we're comforting mourners. We say the words Hamakom Yenachem Etchem, may God comfort you. But it's not just God, it's Hamakom, which is the place. Now, the reason that we use that name for God both in Shiva and also for Passover is because not only is because it's actually the place itself that should bring you comfort when you're sitting Shiva, and it's actually the place you're in itself that should make you feel like you're experiencing Passover, and you get closer to God through the actual space. When somebody's in mourning, it's traditional for community members to go and to go over to their home and prepare it. They're the ones who cover the windows. They're the ones who bring a meal. So when you come home to your makom, to your place, the actual space makes you feel comfortable. It makes you feel like the Jewish people and God actually care about you. Similarly, on Passover, space is extremely important. We spend weeks, and we have a lot of time now, preparing our house for Passover, getting out all the crumbs, sweeping, vacuuming, emptying our cabinets, and ultimately going around even with a feather and a spoon, if you're like me, and getting all the little crumbs, out of the crevices. So by the time Passover comes, the space itself helps you connect to the holiday and helps you connect to God. And so here, on this holiday too, God is called Hamakom, which is the place. And so we start with that declaration. It says, blessed is Hamakom, blessed is God, blessed is he who gave the Torah to his people Israel, blessed is he. And I'm saying he, obviously, I don't think God is gendered. This is just a translation in here. So it says, the Torah addresses itself to 4 sons. One who is wise, one who is wicked, one is naive, and one is unable to ask. So that was the praise. The praise section is blessed is Hamakom. And now we're going to get into the questions, which is the 4 sons. So where do these 4 sons come from? There are 4 times in the Torah that it says you should tell your children about the Exodus from Egypt. And so from that, our rabbi said, well, why is it there 4 times? It must mean because there are 4 different types of kids out there, and each one you need to teach to their level. So this is the question section of the second Magi, and we'll read the first one. It says, what does the wicked one say? It says, what is this service to you? To you, but not to himself. Since he excludes himself from the group, he denies everything. You, too, should set his teeth on edge and say to him, it's because of this that God did for me when I went out of Egypt. For me, but not for him. Had he been there, he would not have been redeemed. So in the same way that the wicked son, the wicked child asks you in a manner that's kind of rude, you give your answer back also in a way that's kind of rude. You give what you get. You get what you give. The next son says, what does the naive son say? What is this? That's what he says. Say to him, God took us out of Egypt from a house of slaves with a mighty hand. Second, and regarding the one who is unable to ask, you open the conversation with him, as it says, and you will tell your, also those are my children playing / screaming in the background. Don't mind them, but it's the reality. We're all home right now. So it says, and regarding the one who is unable to ask, you start the conversation, as it says, and you will tell your son on that day, saying, it's because of this that God did for me when I went out of Egypt. Okay, so there is the question section of this section of Maki. The first started with praise, which is Baruch HaMakom, bless God. The second was we had our questions, and now we're going to get another kind of answer. So it says, we might have held that we should begin telling the story from the first of the month, but the Torah, that is to say, from Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Like, where are you going to start telling the Exodus story from? So it says, on that day, since it says on that day, we might have held that we should begin while it's still day, but the Torah says because of this. I always say, because of this, at a time when matzah maror are placed before you. And so we ask the question, when should we actually do the Seder? This is by way of kind of expounding on the Torah. So it says maybe we should actually have had the Seder on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, at the beginning of the month. But it says no. The Seder has to be done, and these questions to these four sons have to be answered at a time when you have the Seder plate in front of you, when you have the matzah and the maror. And if you've ever taught in a classroom, you know how important props are, and things that are tactile for children to touch. And so it's fitting, after we have these four children who are asking us questions, trying to answer them, that we have this little educational piece too, which says we don't just answer their questions, but actually their questions should be answered only at a time when they can understand them, at a time when we have the Seder plate in front of them, the matzah and the maror. Because if you answer these questions and you don't have those materials, then they won't internalize it as much. Okay, now that was the question part of the second section of Maggid. Now, from what point do we start telling the story of the Exodus? We talked about this last time, how maybe you could even start telling it from the time when Joseph is sold as a slave down to Egypt. And then there's a debate in the Talmud between these two great rabbis, Rav and Shmuel. Shmuel said that we should begin the story with Avadim Hayinu. We were slaves in Egypt. Rav says we should begin the story by saying, first, our ancestors were idol worshippers. So which one should we do? Do we begin the story of the Exodus with saying we were slaves in Egypt? Or do we begin by saying, no, at one point we were idol worshippers, and then we discovered God? Those who created the Haggadah did not choose one over the other. Instead, in these first two sections of Maggid, for the first section, we have Shmuel's response, which is we start the story with Avadim Hayinu. And in the second section of Maggid, we begin with Rav's response. Our ancestors were idol worshippers. So that's why we have this here. And it seems almost random, unless you know that Maggid is broken up into four different little Maggids, and each one has a declaration, a question, answer, and praise. So again, we're on the second section of our Maggid, part of the Haggadah. And the praise was Baruch HaMakom. The questions were the four sons. And now we have an answer, which is our story. It says, at first our ancestors were idolaters, but now HaMakom, that is God, brought us close to worship. As it says, and Joshua said to all of his people, so says Adonai, the God of Israel, your ancestors dwelt beyond the river. Terach, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and they worshipped other gods. And I took your father Abraham from beyond the river, and I led him throughout the land of Canaan. And I multiplied him, and I gave Yitzchak unto him. And I gave Yaakov and Esav to Yitzchak, and to Esav I gave Mount Seir, and Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. So that is Rob's response to actually what the answer should be. So remember, we asked earlier, why is this night different from all other nights in the first section of Maggid? And the first answer was, we were slaves in Egypt. Now, our questions were, what do you say to your kids when they ask you? What do you say to the wise kid, the simple kid, etc.? And the answer is, we begin with Rob's response, which is our ancestors were idol worshippers. So now all that's left in the second section of Maggid. Remember, we need a declaration, we need a question, we need answer, and now we need praise. Lo and behold, we have a paragraph of praise. So this is Baruch Shomer Havtachto Yisrael. Blessed is he who keeps his promise to Israel. Blessed is God. For the Holy One, blessed be God, calculated the end of the exile, to do as he said to Abraham our father at the covenant between the parts. And it is said, and he said to Abraham, know that your offspring will be a stranger in a strange land that is not theirs, and they will serve them, and they will torment them for 400 years. But also the nation whom I will serve and I will judge. Also the nation whom they will serve, I will judge. Afterward, they will go out with great possessions. So this was a promise given to Abraham back in the book of Genesis, chapter 15, verses 13 and 14, if you'd like to go look at it. So there, God actually told Abraham what was about to happen. And we're saying, blessed is God, who not only took us out of Egypt, but who made Abraham a prophet, who actually calculated this at a perfect time. So we would go out of Egypt exactly when God promised Abraham. And we'll continue. And this was called the covenant between the parts. If you're unfamiliar with this part of Genesis, there's one evening where God commands Abraham to make a sacrifice, an animal sacrifice, and Abraham does so, and he's supposed to lay out kind of the animal kind of flayed, with pieces in an auspicious order on both sides. And then at that point, as soon as that is done, Abraham kind of blacks out and has this terrifying vision of his offspring being slaves in Egypt. So that's what this is referring to. Oh, but also not just being slaves in Egypt, but presumably being freed too from Egypt. So, and this continues, it says, this covenant has stood firm for our fathers and for us, for it was not one alone who rose against us to annihilate us, but in every generation there are those who rise against us to annihilate us. But God, blessed be he, saves us from their lands. Saved us from their hands. So what we're saying here is that promise that God gave to Abraham, that your children will be slaves in Egypt, was also for us. That is to say, it's not specifically being slaves in Egypt, but actually that was a general prophecy saying that no, the Israelites and the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, are going to be in service or oppressed, for generations. And lo and behold, that promise has indeed come true. For as long as you go back, you can find oppression. Right now, thank God we have, an era of general peace, but still, it's not perfect. And so in every generation we say, we have been oppressed, but God saves us from their hands. And we say all of that, by the way, with a cup lifted in the air. So that is the second section of Magid. To review, remember, the whole Magid section, as huge and complicated as it seems, is broken down into 4 parts, each with a declaration, a question, an answer, and some praise. In this section, we just did the second one. The declaration was Baruch HaMakom, blessed is God. The questions were the 4 sons, the 4 children. What does the wise one learn? What does the simple one learn, etc.? The answer was Rob's answer, which is, say to your children, our ancestors were idol worshippers. And then we had praise, which is, blessed is the one who saves us in every generation. So before we go to the next section, the third section of Magid, I want to remind us of another goal of the Magid section, and a goal for the whole night, which is to expound to the largest extent possible about the Exodus story. So how did this work? So in the second section of Magid that we just read, part of the expounding was through the 4 children. We're saying that the Torah does not just speak to one person in one way. No, the Torah speaks to different children, different adults, depending on their capacity. So we actually go through in terms of how you should communicate this Torah, the story of the Exodus, to these different types of kids. And so in that way, we're expounding on the Torah and on the Exodus story, as if to say, look at how many different ways we can tell it. So now in the next section of Magid, we do a lot more expounding, but in a really different way. And you're going to see in the next 2 sections of Magid different, also creative ways of expounding on Torah, not just telling the story. I mean, one way you could expound on it, this is just tell and to enlarge the story is to tell it very slowly. That'll take all night. But there are at least two, maybe three other ways of expounding on the story that we're going to see in the next two sections of Maggid. So with that, I think we're going to end for today. This is a natural break. And the next time, we'll look at the third section of Maggid. Remember, 4 is the number of the night, 4 cups, 4 children, 4 questions, and then the Maggid section is broken up into 4 different tellings of the story, the third of which we'll look at next week. So with that, have a wonderful day, and looking forward to seeing you next week at 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday.